Hello, you're listening to the OMG MotoGP podcast with former Grand Prix rider and British champion Keith Huewen, our very own Renita Vermuelen, and back, the wandering Pete McLaren, Crash.net's MotoGP editor. It's a full house because it is, of course, the 2024 MotoGP season review. And just before we delve into things, I always forget to really add this in right until the very end, but there was such great response to our last podcast. So I just wanted to say a massive thank you to all of those that you did listen to our 2025 MotoGP test review with Simon Crafar. And so, as it is the season of goodwill, please do, wherever you are listening to us or watching us, hit the subscribe button. If you do like the content and the episodes, give them a like, because at the end of the day, it just means in this very upcoming season, we can bring us on loads more great guests. We're really glad to see that you love our reviews of the Grand Prix and our previews. But obviously, in the meantime, it's all about the guests. So if you guys give us a follow, then hopefully we can keep them coming. But without further ado, guys, it is the end of the 2024 MotoGP season. So just to really kick us off, warm us up into things, I want you to complete this sentence. Pete, you can start us off with this one.
Cool.
2024 was the year of, obviously MotoGP related.
Mistakes. I mean, the first thing that pops into my mind is Francesco Bagnaglia's, that sentence. It's a championship of mistakes, and I think that sums it up. I think seeing winning all those races that he did, and yet having all those DNFs, I think is pretty unique.
Keith?
Expectation. I think that this year really, for me, makes me look forward to next year even more. I think that we've got so much that's coming in 2026 and beyond, with the advent of Liberty, with the changes to the International Race Teams Association, and so on and so forth. I think my expectation for 2025 is already, I've got the hair standing up on the back of my hand just talking about it.
Renita?
2025. You know what, when you first asked that question, I thought, Batmav. 1 minute he's here, next minute he's gone. And then the other two have come up with some serious answer. I'm like, now I have to say something like consistency is king. But I'm going to stick with Batmav. 1 minute he's here, next minute he's gone.
Come on, Amy.
Do you want mine as well then? Okay, right. 2024 was the year of jeopardy, but perhaps not great racing. Is that starting off on a bit of a downer?
No, you carry on. Tell the truth. Always tell the truth.
I loved the storylines that came out of this year, and it was fantastic that we had another epic title battle. But perhaps the greatness of that wasn't reflected in, we haven't had a year of perhaps the best races that I can remember. So I'm hoping 2025 will be a year of more epic Titanic battles.
It's almost guaranteed, isn't it? Marc Marquez alongside Bagnaia, Jorge Martin defending his championship, but obviously we don't know whether Aprilia is going to be any good next year or whether they're going to get through it. KTM, we don't know whether their financial worries are going to reflect in the way the motorcycles perform or the teams perform next year. There's always the usual questions coming up to next year, but I suppose if an individual point of view, it's Jorge Martin, isn't it? The way he's matured into what he matured into. He did everything absolutely spot on, dead right. Didn't win as many races. Doesn't matter. When you've got that points lead and you are mature enough and able to defend it in the way that he did, classy. And I think this year, wasn't it a nice year? I hate the word nice. I absolutely hate it. But they've all got their arms around each other and they're all, even Rivola's sneaking up on Bagnaia and saying what a wonderful gentleman he is. I hate the word, but I love the way that we've evolved in this last year. I mean, it doesn't have to be always, pickaxe handles and beating each other up and verbally abusing each other behind the scenes. I think it showed us a different style, a different way of Grand Prix racing behind the scenes. Personally, I prefer the pickaxe handles and everybody getting stuck into each other. That would be more my style. I've got to say, a bit more aggression, a bit more hatred across the board in the nicest possible way, if you can do that with hatred. But I think that we've had a nice year, really, haven't we? It's been very nice.
Pete, we've obviously not spoken to you since the season wrapped up. What did you make of how the championship came together in the end?
Uh, yeah, I thought the Sepang obviously was crucial, wasn't it? That mistake by Bagnaia in the sprint that took it out of his hands, if you like, where winning was no longer enough after that. He did go on to win the remaining 3 races, didn't he? But it just wasn't that was the moment for me. And I know there were a lot of mistakes during the year. There was other races where he only scored 1 or 2 points, tire issues, whatever. There's lots of what ifs you can take from the year, but I think that was the last one always feels more important, doesn't it? The last big mistake. And as Keith said, Hoy Martin, he kept his calm. He managed the pressure, and ultimately, that's what got him the title. I thought both of them exceptional in the final rounds with all that pressure on their shoulders. Very open about the pressure, weren't they? Talking about it, which is also a new thing for us. Usually the past riders would keep any weakness sort of hidden, wouldn't they? But these guys were pretty open about how difficult it is to deal with the pressure. But both of them dealt with it very well. And yeah, I was a little bit cynical about, will Bagnaia, when it comes down to it, will he change his approach? Will he get a bit nasty or whatever? Absolutely not. What a total class act, wasn't it? You saw when he'd lost the championship, standing there applauding Martin and that behavior. I mean, that really exceptional. I think, okay, he lost on track this year, but Bagnaia won in a lot of other ways, I think, and certainly I'm sure has won a lot of new fans.
There's going to be one guy out there that is not going to be enjoying the pleasantries quite so much. Our very own MotoGP Rookie of the Year, Pedro Acosta. Not only has he stolen the show by himself, but obviously his personality has won over a lot of people as well. So before we perhaps put a name to who's going on the naughty list at MotoGP this year, let's spend some time talking about the wonder kid that is Pedro Acosta and how special his first season has been.
Well, Renita probably should do that one first if you want, because you've just been excluded from that little roundup we just done.
No, that's totally okay. It's funny when you mentioned Pedro then, and I started thinking about his season and excluding Marc Marquez from his rookie season. I feel like in my mind, a rookie season kind of starts off a little bit softer and then they get a bit of momentum towards the end. But I feel like we saw the opposite with Pedro. He came in at guns blazing and he was on the podium. Was it the second round of the season? And so I feel like with Pedro, he kind of got to that ceiling quite quickly. But the ceiling, it's not solid for him. We know where he's going to go and it's going to go far. Interesting to see how in just after the summer break, there was some changes. I felt like, he was pushing a bit harder, maybe crashing out, making silly mistakes. And that's kind of what I expected to see earlier on. Surprisingly, he got stronger throughout the end as we headed to those flyaway rounds. So for me, the Shark this year, he was on the attack, but he was just slowly hunting his prey. Next year, I think we're going to see the real Pedro Acosta come out. But thanks, Keith. Thanks for letting me talk about that one. Now I want to hear from you.
Well, Acosta, I mean, I think that what you said is valid. And at the end of the day, these guys they pick up incrementally through the year. I mean, he got on a motorbike that worked for him straight away. That feeling is fantastic. When you get on a bike you actually quite like, you can perform straight out of the box. But of course, everybody gets quicker as the data comes in and they move forward. I mean, he didn't end up being the KTM top dog in the end by 2 points. I think it was Binder beat him in the end, which will bloody annoy him. Okay, Rookie of the Year, fine. There isn't that many people out there that made that a big deal, perhaps. But he really would have wanted to be top KTM, even though he's on a gas, which is a KTM for anybody that's wondering what I'm on about. So at the end of the day, Acosta, yeah, he had that dip in the middle of the season, but he is a remarkable talent, and we'll wait and see whether some of the new rookies that come in this year, and we've got 3 of them, whether they can perform anything like Acosta did when he hit the scene at the beginning of 2024.
Pete, do you think, though, that perhaps needs to be a question raised next year if he continues to crash as much as he's done? Or is he just going to be like a bit of a Marc Marquez, that he's always going to have a crash or two throughout the course of the weekend because that's his way of finding where that limit is and beyond?
He was top of the list, wasn't he, for falls this year with those 28. So, yeah, certainly. But I think actually all the KTMs were quite high up in the list, weren't they? I think they're all in sort of the top 7. So it was I think they were having to override that bike, weren't they, to try and stay competitive with the Ducatis. And, Acosta, he's not prepared to sort of just accept, some of the lower placings, which he reflected later on in the year. Look, if I had a 5th place for every time I crashed out, look how many more points I'd have. Instead, as Keith says, he lost that 5th place, not only in the last race, on the last lap of the last race. It actually just changed. So yeah, that's going to sting a bit. But, it was only for 5th place. I think early in the year, we thought he's going to win, and certainly Marc Marquez and other people were saying, yeah, look, they were piling the pressure on him as well. But they did have a bit of a difficult time in the middle of the season. We saw also with the KTM as well. Obviously, you can't separate the rider and the bike entirely. But they came back strongly at the end, and certainly that's going to be a strong team next year. I think Binder and Acosta, you've got the experience, the youth, pushing forward. So yeah, excited to see what he can do in his second year.
I was surprised to see Joan Mir wasn't top, to be honest with you, because every time I looked at a camera somewhere, he was laying on his, got a Honda under him. So Joan Mir, although I think he ended up in runner-up, didn't he, as far as the crash sequence was
Marc,
concerned?
I think Marc actually was second. Yeah, I mean,
Of course he was. Marquez will be disappointed he wasn't top.
I mean, Mir began the year with a lot of accidents. He said he had a huge number last year, didn't he? Even though given he missed quite a lot of races that were injury. I mean, obviously, his tally was really high. And he started off that way again. I think during the middle part of the year, he kind of just realized, look, there's no point throwing this bike down the road and for 16th, 17th place. And I think it was then, we need to focus on making the bike better. And I'm assuming that's why he didn't end up as high in the end, at the end of the season, because certainly he began this year. It's just like he was pushing the limits a lot. But you can't fault him for trying, can you? I mean,
No.
This is the other side of things. I mean, Mir's teammate Luca Marini, I think he fell 4 times during the whole year. I mean, that's how few mistakes. I mean, if you want to, a nice job as a mechanic, I guess it's working for Luca Marini, because he's not going to give you late nights fixing the bikes, is he? But also when you're in that position of Honda developing bikes, you don't want to be falling off, do you? And actually, we saw at the test, didn't we? Luca Marini fell early on, and you could see he was sort of holding his head in his hands in frustration, because one of the few times he's dropped the bike this year, and probably he was testing some new parts there. So it was a really bad moment to actually have a fall, but it did just highlight how few mistakes he's made this year.
KTM have got a lot of work to do this year, next year, over the winter. There's no doubt about that. I think that everybody was thrown. Jack Miller being where he was, I think was a big surprise. We know certain financial concerns behind the scenes in Piero Mobility, which are the overarching owners of KTM, Gas, Husqvarna, and the like. So I think that we're going to be looking forward to a big improvement from those guys to some extent. I mean, chatter was a major problem. Again, Acosta, he outrode probably. I mean, getting back to you, Renita, he kind of rode through problems that a rookie doesn't necessarily have to come across quite often with a motorbike that's working, perhaps as it might be across all of the different teams that are running them. And I think Jack Miller's performance, I'm pleased he stayed in Grand Prix. There'll be a lot of people banging. I mean, he's my disappointment of the year, to be honest. So I've kind of got this double-edged sword with Jack. I want to see him do well. I'm glad he's in MotoGP next year again, and we'll see whether he can come back from that.
Maybe using a different word rather than disappointment. Like, there's been a few riders that have kind of flown under the radar this year, haven't there? And you could kind of allude to your Batmavs. Yeah, he won a race this year, but mostly he's kind of not really been in the main headlines. Another one I think you could put up there is Franco Morbidelli. However, it did look as though towards the back end of the season, he's such a strange rider in terms of his story. He was runner-up in the championship. I think it was in 2020. And then he obviously, I think it was a knee injury, and so he drifted off. And then when it kind of, he needs to, he flipped back in there again. You're like, okay, Franco's coming again. And then he fizzles out. But towards the back end of the season, does this mean in 2025 we're going to see a bit more of Franco Morbidelli again? What do you guys think?
I think so, yes. I think, losing all of that winter preseason testing with the, with that head injury that he had, starting so far behind. Actually, he's one of the few guys who's going to be on exactly the same bike next year, isn't he? So he's going from one extreme to the other. One extreme of having no testing to getting on a bike that literally the same bike that he's raced all of this year. So as you say, he did move up the order towards the end of the year, didn't he? Got into the top 9th in the championship in the end. So he did make progress, but certainly, everyone's waiting to see Frankie return to the kind of Yamaha form that he had, isn't it? I mean, he's on the best bike now. Okay, it'll be a year-old bike next year, but the equipment's there. He's in the VR46 team, and I think it's a massive year for him next year. Another Italian VR46 guy, probably if you're looking for disappointments, I mean, Marco Bezzecchi finishing that far down, wasn't it? Last of the Ducatis. I mean, going from third in the World Championship to last of the Ducatis. I thought that was a big shock for me. I didn't, expect that from him. I thought, he might be fighting for the championship, at least in the early stages. But as we know, the GP23, very different bike, wasn't it, from the 22, and quite a step behind the 24. So it was a difficult season for all the satellite Ducati guys. Marquez obviously way above all of the others. But yeah, I think obviously no one wants to finish last on the bike of the riders on the same bike. So yeah, Bezzecchi, difficult year for him after really making big steps in his previous years.
And a shout out for Raul Fernandez as well, who I have to say, I think he was my, I expected him to do something unusual during the course of the year, and it didn't quite come, did it? He showed just a couple of little shiny spots during the course of the year, but it didn't just quite happen for him either.
I think continuing on there with Trackhouse, for me, maybe Miguel Oliveira, purely just for the fact that he was on the podium so early on in the season, and then towards the end of the season had to miss out on multiple races due to injury. I mean, it's hard to, once again, start the season on a high and then continue down and not have such an ebb and flow, I think. Bittersweet,
Long
especially
season.
long season. But yeah, moving over to Pramaha and new beginnings, and you start there with a 2-year contract. So happy days for him in the end.
You can't say Pramaha with a British accent. It's so cool, can you? It only sounds good with an Aussie twang.
Oh.
Like, Pramaha.
Pramaha.
I actually saw in the comments the other day, we keep on getting slaved for the way we say Ducati.
Yeah, it's only because yeah, but was it an American that wants it Ducati or something?
Is that how it's meant? I was going to say, how else are you meant to say it? Ducati,
No, well, they
Ducati?
say Jaguar, don't they? They still say Jaguar.
That's a British company though, isn't it? Anyway, moving swiftly onwards.
I'm looking forward to the guys that are coming up into MotoGP as well. I mean, we've got the Moto2 world champion, Iogara. We got my mate from Thailand, Somkiat Chantra, who's coming across into LCR. Who knows where that's going to take us? At least he'll have a big smile on his face, whatever happens. And then Fermin Aldegar, who takes over from Marquez at Gresini. That for me is a key spot. That's one we need to be keeping an eye on. I mean, he comes with great expectations. Probably didn't quite turn out the way he was expecting it to in Moto2 this year, but he moves up into a good team, and we know what he's capable of. So there'll be a little bit of pressure on Fermin. There's no doubt about that.
Well, Pete, I guess my question to you, sorry to take over here asking questions, Amy, but just when Keith was talking then, what have you noticed this year in the second half of the year with Fermin? Is there a lot of talk about him and the potential that he has to bring to MotoGP?
I think the first thing to say is he's very young, isn't he? I mean, he's still a teenager. I think that's something that is easily forgotten because he was so strong at the end of 23, wasn't he? Beating Acosta in those last races. Start 24 with a Ducati contract in his pocket already before the first race. Everything looks in place for him to kind of dominate this season in Moto2, and it just didn't turn out that way at all, did it? Even though the Boscoscuro, the bike he was on, was the bike to beat, certainly in the first half of the year. So everything was there, but things went against him, didn't they? Loads of weird things with long laps and accidents, and then finishing the year with injury as well. So yeah, I think the talent is clearly there. That's the thing. This season got derailed for whatever reason, and now he needs to come back for that. But he's in the perfect situation to do that with what looks like a great bike. I mean, we know the 24 Ducati's obviously won the championship, but there's no big changes tire-wise and that kind of thing to sort of think that that's going to be upset for next year. So they know the bike works with these current generation of tires. He's slotting into Marc Marquez's ex-crew, Frankie Carcetti, all of that experience. So it's all there around him, a satellite team, family atmosphere, as they say. It's all there for him to do well. And clearly he has got the talent. He proved that at the end of 23, as you say. So you'd expect him, I think, if you look at the three rookies, to be the favourite for the rookie of the year at least. And it's just a matter of, well, how high up the leaderboard can he get, in general. But yeah, the talent is there and he's still very young. I think those are the two things that sort of stand out for me.
And Ducati certainly believe in him. 2-year contract, through 25, 26, and an option on that as well. So he's got a 2-year option off the back of that. So certainly Ducati, was that Ducati? Can't remember. Certainly got an option for him. So they believe in him. Sorry, if anybody's watching this on YouTube and it looks like I'm whiting out, I'm shooting this from in England at the moment, where it has probably only just stopped raining for about the last week, and I can't believe the sun is coming in through here and setting fire to the side of my face. Now, you didn't think anybody in England would be saying that, did you?
Well, talking about big surprises, let's go through our biggest surprises. Biggest surprise of the year. It can be anything. It doesn't have to be a rider. It can be a race. It can be a race result. I can kick us off if that helps. And it's a bit of a weird one because I feel like I'm piggybacking off the back of last year a little bit with this one. But Fabio Di Giannantonio, I have to put my kind of honest hat on here. And he did amazingly well at fighting for his ride at the back end of last season. He booked himself a spot in MotoGP, and there was the slightest part of me that wondered whether he would drift off and he perhaps it would fade into almost a bit like an Augusto Fernandez. It would fade into a bit of nothing. I am so happy to be absolutely wrong and for him to have had another really great season. He looks as though he's just really kind of developing as a rider, and I think the best part about it is it does look as though there's still more to come.
Who's going next? Go on, Renita. You go next. Ladies first. I'm
Oh,
old-fashioned.
thank you so much. It's funny, I actually did a little interview with him for my job, and talking with him, and he just explained how much he's gelled working with VR46 and mentally how that has really helped him. And it was almost refreshing to see. You could see the sparkle in his eye. And even though he'd just done his shoulder and he was kind of like playing everything down, he's like, mentally, I feel good. Like I can be up the front mentally. It's just physically, it's holding me back. And normally, sometimes, these riders, they'll be like, oh, the shoulder, or they'll play it off and be like, no, I'm fit. He's like, no, I would be there if I could. And for me, I was like, it just ticked all the boxes. I was thinking next year he's going to come back fitter, stronger, and we're going to see Fabio Di Giannantonio 2.0. So I'm really excited for 2025. Keith, you're up next.
No, I'll give it to Pete. He's a top
Oh,
man.
sorry, Pete. It's like the Brady Bunch on the screen, isn't it? We'll go that way.
Well, I'm going to go for a race. I think the Barcelona sprint, but the one in May, I think that where we had Raul Fernandez leading, crashing, we had Pecco falling on the last lap. I think Binder was leading and went off, and then Aleix goes and wins his home race on 2 days after announcing he's retiring. I think for me, that's up there for the highlight of the year. As far as Digia, I mean, he's with all these riders leaving Ducati. He's perfectly positioned now, isn't he? There's only going to be 3 GP25s. He's on the only one that's not in the factory team, so that's a really great position to be in. He sort of came into VR46 almost felt a bit unwanted, wasn't it? But they were looking at initially when the rumors started last year. They were saying, well, we're more for VR46 was saying we're more a team for rookies and young academy riders. Of course, Digi is not a member of the academy, but his results sort of forced them to look at him. I mean, winning in Qatar and everything else. So he got the ride, and he's really, as you say, settled in so well there, hasn't he? And Shane with the injury, I think was he about 8th in the World Championship when he backed out of it. So obviously that reflects his final position in the standings. But didn't quite get the podium. I think that was what was missing for this year. I think he would have liked to get a trophy, wouldn't he? Obviously, Bezzecchi did get one. But was actually behind him in the championship standing. So they were all sort of beaten by Marc. That's the trouble for these guys on the 23 this year, isn't it? Is that all of them, no matter what reasons they might have with the bike, the 24 tire on the 23 bike, Marc Marquez, took 20 podiums or something with it. So that's the difficulty for all of them. But Digia, he's well placed, as with Aldeguer, as Keith mentioned. So he's got a long-term contract. Digia and Aldeguer, potentially, they're the future of Ducati, aren't they? They're poised there. If Marc or Pecco move on at some stage, they're next in line now. So it's up to them to prove that they deserve to be there.
Yeah, they've got to get around that Marc Marquez bloke yet, and the resurgent Bagnaia, I reckon. You've pretty much covered some of the top stuff that I'd got in the back of my head, so I had to very quickly think of some more while you're going for it there, Pierre. Thank you very much. I'm quite excited to see confirmation of the top three in Moto3 coming up to Moto2, which is, we've seen some really talented guys in the Moto3 this year again has shown us. I mean, especially the number one man. I mean, Alonso had been absolutely brilliant throughout the year. So seeing them move up into Moto2, we've got the Moto2 world champion, Iogura, moving up. I have to say, admit to not having faith that he would win that title. I just didn't think it was going to happen for him at one point. And to see Iogura win that, he's a very Japanese personality, isn't he? He does his job, quietly and gets on with it. And he's a world champion moving up into Moto GP. But probably the biggest thing this year for me, if we move away, you said we could do anything we like, Damien. So I'm going to go with the Liberty thing. I think that's the biggest thing to hit MotoGP ever. And it's going to be something that moving forward, once that deal, it still ain't bloody signed yet. We're in November and it still hasn't been signed off for a definite. But I feel that that's more positive than negative, in as much as that we would have heard if there'd been any massive barriers towards that deal being finished off. Carmelo Espaleta's done a fantastic job. Wife Maria, son Carlos, they've done a great job. As far as they've kind of need to pass that baton on. It's time for it to move forward, and I think Liberty is the right thing to move it forward. So I'm looking forward to that. And then there's obviously the IRTA transition. From Mike Trimby, that pinnacle of everything that is right and wonderful about MotoGP. Mike Trimby passed away over a year ago now at Misano. That group, that organization had the CEO, the top man, that even Carmelo Espaleta and the like looked up to and consulted in everything that they did to move our sport forward. To see that transition so smooth during 2024 amazed me. I mean, it didn't fall on their face anywhere as far as I could see. Everything ran as it should do, as typically, rest his soul, Mike would have set it up to be that way. And so, my thoughts, obviously for Mike and Irene, obviously, and I think it's worked out pretty damn well. I think we're in for a great future in MotoGP because of the riders, because of the teams, because of the organisation behind it, and because Liberty have got a stack of cash and it needs it to move it forward. Thank you very much.
The Liberty takeover was a great shout, Keith. Pete, is there any more whispers on that?
I think there was. I saw a news story during the flyaways. I think it is progressing, isn't it? I think they're, as he says, it's on track. We've always heard that it's the end of this year is the timeline for this. As far as I'm aware, that's all progressing. So yeah, as far as I know, it's all going to plan. But I think that there's nothing really happening until it's all done, if that makes sense. So I think people thought, maybe as soon as this was announced, this intention to buy MotoGP, that people would start coming in and changing things. I don't think that's the case. I think, you've got to get all of the paperwork done, if you like, get the deal done, and it'll be next year where we see the changes happen.
Renita, one of the other big stories of 2024 has to be that Marc Marquez returned to winning ways after, was it 1,030-something days, a long bloody time. But it was huge. And then it felt like as soon as the win started, they started to kind of roll on for him. What does that mean for next year? And also, what does that mean for us as the fans? To see someone like Marc Marquez get back to the top step of the podium.
Isn't it so interesting that there was so many people questioning if he'd ever return? But for him, he had that belief. I watched his documentary and it was, I can get back to the winning ways. And then we understood why he went to Ducati, everything like that. And even for me sitting on the sofa watching him get that podium, I was like, you did it. This is amazing. And I wanted to celebrate that with him because he took us along the journey. We saw him at his lowest and then we saw him return to the top. I think for the sport, it's the best thing because Marc Marquez is one of the big names that attracts people now. Obviously, we've got Pecco, we've got Jorge and Fabio, but Marc Marquez is like becoming the like Valentino Rossi. He brings people in. So to see him back on top is incredible. Then to see him do it again, I was like, okay, you've done it once now. Like, are you going to keep going? And even at Phillip Island, watching him with that terrible start and then to take the victory there, it's contagious. You want to be a part of it and you want to celebrate it with him because you've seen that story. But next year for him to partner out, team up with Factory Ducati, Pecco Bagnaia, that I am so excited for. I feel like it's almost like a Rossi Lorenzo garage, just without that wall in the middle for now. And hopefully it stays that way. But because they're quite different characters, and that's what I can't wait to see them on track and off track.
Just looking down the list here, there's 12 major changes in MotoGP next year. And for a grid that's as small as it is, that's quite a lot. We need to really go through them a bit, don't we? Vignales obviously from Aprilia to KTM. Morbidelli from Pramac to Ducati, obviously. We've got Somkhat Chanchurin. We've got Pedro Acosta goes from Tech 3 to KTM, factory. Then we've got the Yamaha man, Jack Miller now. Or is that Pramaha? Can I say that in English?
Pramaha.
Pramaha for Miller. The Moto2, again, Fermin Aldegar moving up into Grassini, which is fantastic. Ducati to Aprilia for Marco Bezzecchi. We've got the Moto2 world champion that moves into Trackhouse, Ayogura. Ducati to Yamaha, obviously, for Miguel Oliveira. We've covered that already. Jorge Martin, Ducati to Aprilia. Will he be able to stand up with that number 1 plate? I mean, it's a big fillip for Aprilia to have the number 1 plate on board, of course. But, I mean, generally, I mean, certainly I do think that it's going to be a step that Aprilia are going to have to make even more than what Jorge Martin has to make, whether Aprilia can make it work, make that step during next year. And then we've got, obviously, the Grassini Ducati to Ducati factory for Marc Marquez. 12 major changes during the course of the year, really. So I think we're in for a very interesting early testing session. We've had one, obviously, in the cold at Barcelona, but I think that Simon Crafar pretty much underlined the fact that all the major changes, all the major things that we're going to see will be at Sepang and in Thailand right at the beginning of the year. Thailand, what a way to start the year, Pete. Me and you, we're at home.
And coming back to Jorge Martin and Aprilia, what a place to start. Because with that bike, the big question mark is, can they make it work better in the hot tracks, isn't it? So he's going straight into one of Aprilia's toughest circumstances. You'll have the test as well. I suppose in a way that's good for Aprilia. You know, if that is their weak point, they're now going to get 2 tests in very hot conditions to work on it, and then they're going straight into the race weekend, as you say, Keith. At a track where the Aprilia. It's not just that it seems that it's hot for the riders. The bike performance, for whatever reason, drops, doesn't it? You know, the engine is not as powerful. It's almost like it's too sealed in. Some people sort of is one of the theories that the aero is so sort of advanced on the Aprilia that everything's sort of sealed in and the bike gets too hot. Exactly what it is, who knows? But there's definitely that drop, isn't there, in performance in the hot conditions, and they're going to have to solve that if Martin is going to put in a full season, of being competitive.
Heat is everything at the end of the day. I mean, do you remember that we used to get with the Honda in Moto2? Moto2, everything was so incredibly similar that there was no performance gain to be had, even from setup, by the time we got to the end of however many years it was with the Honda power unit. And so you would see every time a Moto2 bike came into stop, there'd be masses of fans squirted at the thing to try and get rid of that heat soak, because when you went out for a quick lap, if you're in qualifying, for instance, those couple of horsepowers lost because of the heat that was within the bike. You just couldn't dissipate it fast enough, couldn't get rid of it. And anybody who's not stood or sat on a MotoGP bike when it's come back in, they are absolutely on fire, quite literally. Well, not quite literally, obviously, that's rubbish, but very nearly. But the point being is that I think you're right. And with the ground effects that Aprilia developed, I mean, there's all sorts of development going on aero. And I think this is where the car boys have obviously stolen a march on everything. I mean, you wonder sometimes whether we're going to get some more aero people get involved Although the rules by the time we get to 27, now the rules have meant by the time we get to 27 that we've got more of a restricted on aero, but that only means to me that the clever people will find an advancement in that. And so therefore you will have more clever people that come into, even though it's a bit narrower and all the rest of it, as is supposed to be the case, we are going to still see aero being a major factor even when we get to 2027. So therefore, maybe they should employ somebody from Formula One. I have to allude a little bit here towards Harry. Of course, our host that has been absent for some time because obviously he's involved in Formula One. Harry Benjamin, doing brilliantly in F1. And what's happened with that is it's because of Harry, it's made me watch more things Formula One. I always used to pay a bit of attention because of sometimes there's things in Formula One that we could use in bikes and so on. So it's interesting from that. And I've just come off the back of a series. It's not quite finished yet. It's live on TV at the moment. Brawn. It's about Brawn when Ross Brawn took over the Honda team as was. Man, if we could have a story like that in MotoGP, it is just the best. He bought the team basically for £1, handed £1 over the Japanese, and took the team on and produced innovations in aero that made the car dominant back in the era of Jenson Button.
What are you watching that on? I swear I've watched that before.
It's actually on. Have you seen it before then?
I swear I watched it on Disney.
Oh, on Disney. Oh, blimey! I don't know. You are a princess.
What are you watching it on?
I don't know. It's out on a normal TV. I don't know. I flick the
I
tape.
know exactly what you're talking about. It's really interesting.
Oh, it's unbelievably good. It's unbelievably good. And my point is that aero means everything in modern era, and we will still be having this problem if it is a problem. Moving forward to even the 2027 rules. I don't anybody that thinks that it's and Honda have got to pick the pace up. I mean, Honda next year have got an opportunity to do anything they want to do, however they want to do it, because basically they can do it with their factory riders. They've got more testing. They can test at actual racetracks that we're going to be racing on. They've got more engines. They've got more tires. They've got more everything. So, and Honda have got, aero tunnels. They just didn't use them up until recently, which is the big problem for Honda in a way. Yamaha have obviously got to pick up the pace on that one as well. But aero is going to still be a major factor over the next few years.
Pete, how much do you think Romano Albiciano, how much do you think that will be a loss for Aprilia?
I mean, he's taken that bike from the back to the front, hasn't he? And speaking of aero, that's his sort of one area of his background. Obviously, he's at the very top, or he has been at the very top of Aprilia in the management, the overall position. But earlier in his career, he did specialize in aero work. So it's no surprise, I suppose, that the RSGP led the way with the ground effect and going their own way with the aero. So certainly, it's going to be a loss when you see what he's done with that bike. Same with Aleix, isn't it? The two of them together, and at the same time, it depends on which side of the coin you look at it. It's also a great game for Honda to have both of them, because you've got both sides of that development puzzle, haven't you? You've got the rider and you've got the guy who then put into effect what the rider wanted, both of them coming across to Honda. But I think with Aleix retiring and with Martin coming in, it's a big change anyway. So to bring in Stellacchini at the same time, next year's bike, the design work would have been done, wouldn't it? Pretty much by now anyway. So I don't think it's going to have a major effect on the 25 bike for Aprilia. Probably the bigger change will be when the new rules come in that Keith's just been speaking about, the 850 bikes. Those would be the big difference. That will probably really be the first real, let's say, Stellacchini Aprilia, and I suppose Albeciano Honda. We're not exactly sure what his role will be at Honda yet. But clearly, he's in a very senior position, really unique to have a European that high up in HRC on the design side. So they're really giving him, some big responsibility here, a bit like Yamaha with Max Bartolini. But I think Albeciano certainly talking about, and Keith's right about the aero. And Luca Marini has also said aero is key to everything now, because it can do everything on the bike. You need to turn better, aero can help with that. You need to stop better, the aero can help with that. You want to go quicker on the straight, less drag, the aero will help with. So every bit of the bike, the aero can help with. So, and it's the area where Honda are clearly behind. So getting Albeciano in, someone who's gone his own way with the aero on the Aprilia, I think that's definitely going to be a big step for them. as you say, what will Aprilia lose? We saw, I think, in the Barcelona test, they were trying the fairings that looked a bit like Ducati style. So maybe they're thinking there was a bit of a question mark this year, wasn't there, about the 24 bike, the 23 bike, because as Keith says, with Raul Fernandez early in the year was doing some heroic rides, wasn't he, on the 23 bike? And there were some cases where they I think Aprilia decided that probably the 23 Aero anyway was better in some corners, or this kind of thing. So I think there's Aero work going on at Aprilia anyway, some question marks over the Aero, but certainly at Honda that they've got to make a big step, and Albaciano will help a lot with that.
Interesting that crew chiefs have a lot to do with this as well. When Mike Leitner went across from Honda to KTM, he brought Danny Pedrosa across as a test rider, and he's done a fantastic job, even for a little fella. In the situation you're talking about with Albaciano and Aprilia, taking Aleix Espargaro across, of course, as well. So Aleix Espargaro is going to be a test rider next year for Honda, which was a surprise to me. Do you know what, Pete? Right up until that comment that you've just made, I've only just put two and two together. And it is a crew chief rider collaboration quite often that brings a test team forward. And I think that might be a very good reason why Aleix has gone to Honda as well. Augusto Fernandez, we talked about him a little bit earlier. Obviously, he's gone across as a Yamaha test rider in 25. And Takaki Nakagami's retired as well. So these three retirements, if you like. He's an HRC test rider too. So they've got quite a powerful test team worked out at HRC for next year. And they'll need it.
Well, so will Yamaha. How would we score Yamaha on their report card for 2024? Renita, do you want to start us off with that?
Could you see me like screwing my face up a little bit?
Yeah.
I was really surprised to see Fabio pushing as hard as he was in the second half of the year. We saw that incredible ride from him. Was it Catalunya, where he felt really comfortable by the looks? I might have the circuits wrong. It's been a long season, as we've said. But there was that little glimpse that we saw from him earlier in the year. And then it felt like in the second half of the year, we definitely saw some strength. And I think I asked you guys both this one in multiple pods. It's like, is this what we have to look forward to? We're seeing Fabio make it into Q2. We're seeing him get like better qualifying results. We're seeing him further up in the race results. Is this what we have to look forward to next year? Could he be fighting back? But then Alex Rins has just kind of been further down the field, and it's really hit and miss. And that's what's made me question everything. But then seeing what Pramac Yamaha are bringing across with Miguel and Jack, I think is going to be a really good combination in what you guys were just talking about before. But for this year, I thought maybe Fabio was like a 6 out of 10 if I'm actually going to give him a score, if that's what you're asking me. But for Alex Rins, I don't necessarily want to answer that one.
I think motivation is everything, Renita, and I think that the fact is the reason why you see Fabio pushing as hard as he can is because he can see Yamaha playing the game. You know, they brought they should have had a secondary team in there. They should have had an independent team in there ages ago, and they haven't done it. They've got Pramac on board. You know, he's obviously on big bucks anyway, Fabio at Yamaha, to keep him in place. But I think the motivation is what does it for a rider. All these guys are all of a really good level. If you go back to even Augusto Fernandez, fact of the matter is he ain't a bad rider. It's just that we are in top quality, top team territory. You know, so at the end of the day, you know, no disrespect to anybody anywhere in any of this field, you know, both, you know, on the bike or off the bike, it's a situation where they are all at their very best. And I think that motivation is the bit that just moves you that sort of 0.0001% further on. And Fabio Quartararo is motivated by what he's seeing around him at the moment. And that kind of breeds within. And I think that Yamaha, I really thought that they were going to end up going the same way as Suzuki. I really thought that, well, they only had two choices. They either went the same way as Suzuki, or they did what they've done now, chuck the kitchen sink at it and hire in some decent test riders. They're in that category D situation, which means that they've got extra tires, extra engines, extra time on track throughout next year. So they have a real opportunity. The only thing that mires that, as we've talked about before, Pete, is that it buggers up, for want of a better phrase, the development perhaps of either bikes for 25 and 26 or bikes from 27 onwards, because to run two programs in parallel, we've talked about it many times, that's a big deal engineering wise. That takes big bucks and a big factory.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, it's a massive commitment, and there is a danger of, you know, not putting as much into the one that works. You've got to dilute your resources, haven't you? So, and as Max Bartolini said, at some point they will have to make a decision. We know they're starting the V4 program. We don't know what stage it's at, but at a certain point, they're going to have to decide, do we go all in on the V4? Do we go with the inline? And then, as you say, Keith, what do we do for 27? So there's lots of decisions for them to make. But I think coming back to the general question of Yamaha season, I think, all the high points really were off the track. I think keeping Quartararo, that was massive for them. I think there was a lot of doubts that they were able to do that. That was the first thing. As you say, Keith, signing Pramac, the reigning team champions, and now the reigning riders champions actually, but this year as well. Getting them as their satellite team, that was another big win. Signing Max Bartolini, then you had the V4 project. So all of the high points really for Yamaha have been off the track this year, because no podiums. I mean, the first time ever in the MotoGP era where a Yamaha hasn't been on the podium at all. I mean, Fabio technically finished third, didn't he, at the Jerez sprint, but then that tire pressure penalty bumped him off the top three there. So sixth I think was his best in the Grand Prix races this year in Malaysia. So they did make progress. It was getting better towards the end of the year, and I think that will be encouraging for them. But still a long way to go, isn't there, for both Yamaha and Honda? I suppose that the positive point is that because it is all so close in MotoGP now, as you've just been saying, Keith, everyone is so fast that really, a small step can make a big difference, can't it, in terms of the results?
I wonder how much money is going to count this year, you guys. It's an open question, really. I mean, we've got a situation where we know we've talked about the situation at KTM. I'm sure they'll sort out their funding and it'll all be okay. But you've got the same situation at Honda. Repsol for the first time. We're not going to any Repsol bikes next year. When was the last time you saw a Honda race without Repsol emblazoned largely over the side of it? So no Repsol sponsorship next year in a major situation, in a major way. That has got to have an effect on a team that is having to effectively, we're going to be in HRC colours. I mean, have you heard anything, Pete, as far as a replacement sponsor for that?
Well, the provisional entry list as it is for 25 came out, and it's just got Honda HRC as the name. So that doesn't mean it's official yet, because it also still had Jorge Martin with the number 89. So you could still make changes right up until the first race of the season. So I think it'd be a surprise if they don't get some form of title sponsor, but exactly who that will be, and whether, as you say, Keith, whether they're going to pay as much as Repsol did. That's the big thing. Although if any company can sort of soak up the cost of running a MotoGP team, I suppose it's Honda, isn't it? And we know that the Japanese, they're determined, and Honda especially. They're determined to show that they can turn a project around. They can be successful. They've gone through hard times in MotoGP before, haven't they? Uncompetitive bikes we've seen, and it almost spurs them into action. It's just that it can take a bit of time for those results to sort of come through. And as we saw, Marc Marquez, he couldn't wait as a rider. His career is, he's 31, he'll be 32 at the start of next year. He couldn't wait, but, let's see how long it takes for Honda. They're making the changes now, but it's a slow thing, isn't it? It's not an instant click your fingers and it happens. As Luca Marini said again, Marini's one of the best riders to talk to, because he can give a real good insight into pretty much any area. And people were saying, oh, look, Honda's got Alberciano now. They're following the timeline or following the, Yamaha getting Bartolini and the Yamaha starting to improve. But as Lucas said, but the Yamaha's not there yet either. So it's not just a case of you get some European guys in and suddenly the bike's great, because Yamaha are still a step behind, as we've just been saying, no podiums this year. So it's strange. It's so close, and yet it's so hard for the others to make that bridge that gap to the Ducatis at the front, isn't it?
Before we round off our 2024 season review with a good old favourite, which one was your favourite race? Might be slightly predictable, but it'd feel as though we're robbing people back home if we didn't include it at the end. I just want to touch on one more rider that I feel like we didn't perhaps give him enough airtime in this episode as he deserves. But then actually it feels like it's a little bit this guy's story. Enea Bastianini, why do we not talk about him enough, and why do we not sing his praises? He is a really great rider. He's a lovely personality.
You
but
can't
for
beat
some reason,
You can't beat someone that's under the radar, Amy. It's perfect. I mean, he's going about his job, and next year he'll go bang, win the
Do you think
championship.
he will?
Yeah, he could do easily.
On KTM?
Well, I mean, it depends where KTM are going, doesn't it? It depends whether they come up with the step. It's all about whether, KTM have worried me a bit this last little while, because we've had this chatter business when the tire changes. The new rear tire has caused a few problems during the course of the year and Jack Miller and haven't been able to get over it. But I reckon Bastianini, the way he rides a motorbike, is completely different. We've always talked about how he can make tires last, tires work, and so on and so forth. He might be just the man to bring it forward. It's going to be interesting to see how KTM's commitment brings it on. But someone like Bastianini, you're right, he's a quality rider, and so therefore I don't think you can write him off. That would be my assessment straight away. And I think KTM will they haven't really made a big step this year. I think they will make one next year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Bastianini, he's won a lot of races now, isn't he? On satellite bikes, factory bikes. He kind of, it was almost assumed, wasn't it, even by the start of this year, that his seat was going to go to somebody else, whether it went to Martin or Marquez or somebody. So difficult situation. He starts the year already knowing that probably people are lining up someone else to take over his ride. But he did the season that I guess we kind of expected him to do last year, and it just all went wrong last year, didn't it? And with the injury at the first round, he changed his crew chief, of course, who he will rejoin at KTM next year. So there's something else that positive for him in that move to KTM. He'll rejoin with Girabola, who he had all that success with at Gresini. So he's going back to somebody he knows there. He went into the factory team, and we saw glimpses of it. And then this season, a bit like Marquez, there was a moment in the Silverstone time. After that, he was getting the wins, wasn't he? We thought maybe there's a title challenge here, but just as it went up in smoke, literally, for Marquez in Indonesia with that accident in Mandalika, I think that was it for Bastianini. But certainly, the talent is there, and he's got something special, as Keith said, to be so strong at the end of the races. And if he can replicate that at KTM, then that's the real strength to have in this era where potentially you can run a softer tire or something else. If you can make a tire work that other people can't, that could really play to his advantage.
Renita, why do you think we don't speak about him enough?
I think because he kind of just got overshadowed. It's funny, when I was just listening to Keith and Pete then, and I'm going, Jorge Martin had the situation where he was losing his ride, and we made like a big song and dance about it. But yeah, the same thing happened to Enea Bastianini, and you kind of forgot about it. It was just like, oh yeah, well, it's because Mark or Jorge are going to get it. He kind of just gets pushed to the side. So I think that he is a character and he's strong, but we're not seeing maybe the character that we need to see for him to be this front runner, or to be on the screen, or for the broadcast to show, or whatever it is. I think there's just that something. But then, like Pete said, we saw it at Silverstone, where he obviously just had that brilliant weekend, and then we saw the character in him come out on Parc Ferme, and you started to get to know, this is Enea Bastianini, this is who he is. So for me, I think that's why he kind of just flies under the radar. But if I can elaborate a little bit on what the boys were just saying before, the men were just saying before, I think that the motivation, Keith, I think Enea is taking that motivation with him to KTM because he did lose his ride so early on. So I think he's going to go into next year all guns blazing.
Mind you, he did get the ride that Jorge Martin should have had at the factory Ducati's tank camp. So he's had a fair bite of the cherry at it. Jorge Martin was done down twice, 2 years running, and didn't get himself the factory ride. So flicking the bird to Ducati and moving on to Aprilia is probably inevitable in that situation.
Okay, right. Who's going to start us off?
Up to you.
Go on then, Keith.
Everyone's going to hate me because they're going to call me a fanboy of Marc Marquez, but I am. And so there is all I can tell you. I mean, the double at Aragon, when he came back, taking both wins. I mean, it's just, for me at that point, what that guy's gone through, what that boy has been through in the way of injuries and jumping ship from Honda, away from his crew chief, him and Santi Hernandez were joined at the hip to do all the things that he did. For me, was magnificent. And to make the double win at Aragon, I like Aragon as well. So that'll be for me. That just to see Marquez back on top of the podium all weekend, dominant as he's been in the past, but a long time ago, as you alluded to earlier.
Renita, your favorite race of the year?
Favorite race of the year? Do you know what? When I was doing my prep for us coming on here, and I think that's why I started this pod talking about that Mav, because I remembered Kota from earlier this year. The battles, the passes, the crashes, Marc Marquez crashing out of the lead where we thought he was going to come in super strong, and he was reasonably strong that weekend. Maverick Vinales getting it on pole and then messing up the start, going back down to like 8th or 9th to come through, take the victory for the sprint and the main Grand Prix. I think for me, race-wise, Kota this year, that was one of my highlights for sure.
And Pete?
Yeah, those are both two good choices there, aren't there? Yeah, I'd throw in other possibles. Obviously, the Marquez Pecco Jerez battle, Le Mans, where we had the three of them. Also it was the only time where we actually saw Marquez, Pecco, and Martin all going at it in the final laps. But I think for me, I'm going to go Sepang, the Grand Prix, just because of those early laps. I'd have loved it to have lasted a bit longer, but I just thought that was incredible of them to fight in that way with so much at stake. I thought that was fantastic. And also it showed the level they were above everyone else, finishing on 10 seconds, I think, ahead of third. So yeah, I'll go Sepang. But there were quite a few good ones this year.
We ought to hear from our fans.
Yes,
we ought to hear from everyone down in the.
Please
comments.
do tell us your race of the year and why, and maybe we can put a little social montage up together. And really sign 2024 off with a bang. Many thanks for your pleasure, guys. Your pleasure. Your company.
I'll tell you what, have you
Longer.
been doing the Christmas drinks already? I can see you well decked out there. Got your stockings around the fireplace, got your Chrissy jumper on.
Can I just add in that I was completely set up because Keith and Renita both told me on the last podcast that this was the game plan for the season review, that we were all meant to wear our Christmas jumpers.
It's still
I
the
was
funniest thing.
literally with the lint brush with my Christmas jumper this morning and making sure it didn't have so many ruffles on. And I was like, right, get the fireplace done, and there we go. Christmas.
Still the funniest
touch
comment
to
that
the
we've had
season
on
review.
any of our OMG podcasts this year is when you told Renita to get her tinsel out. I mean, that amused quite a lot of people.
Do or say.
In my defense,
Right, guys.
my Christmas tree's not up because I'm coming over to your side of the world for Christmas. So I'm just going to throw that out there. Can't wait.
Pack your thermals. You
Yeah.
do not need to bring your t-shirt. It is freezing. But Pete, many thanks for joining us and coming along to so many podcasts this year. It's always great to have your views and your opinions and your insights right from the ground. And we will be back throughout the winter with lots of specials, lots of guests coming up. So do stay tuned. And like we said at the top, please do remember to hit the subscribe button wherever you may be listening to us. And always, we love to hear from you guys. But a huge thank you from all of the OMG MotoGP team for listening along this year. And of course, we will be back.